When you point your finger at the monsters in the world, have you ever wondered why 3 fingers point back at yourself? In this video, Carl Jung shares his deep experiments on human psyche that found the root cause of evil in our society. So listen till the end. And if these words make sense to you, don't forget to join our community by subscribing to the channel. Now presenting Carl Jung's experiments on evil and human psyche. I have spent my entire professional life studying the human psyche, descending into its darkest caverns and ascending to its most luminous heights, and I must share with you a truth that disturbs comfortable assumptions about human nature. What I discovered in the consulting room, in the dreams of my patients, in the collective nightmares of nations, reveals something about evil that changes everything we think we understand about where darkness comes from. Allow me to begin with a story that haunted me for years. A respectable businessman arrived at my door, a pillar of his community, known for his charitable works and moral uprightness. Yet he was plagued by inexplicable rage that erupted without warning, destroying relationships and threatening his carefully constructed life. As we worked together, peeling back layers of his consciousness, we discovered that his fury stemmed from aspects of himself he had declared non-existent decades earlier. Natural aggression, healthy selfishness, instinctual desires that his strict religious upbringing had taught him to suppress completely. This pattern repeated itself countless times in my practice. A devoted mother tormented by violent fantasies about her children. A religious scholar whose dreams revealed desires that contradicted everything he consciously believed about himself. A gentle teacher consumed by sudden impulses toward cruelty. Each case pointed toward something fundamental about human psychology, something we desperately wish to avoid recognizing. Imagine your psyche as a vast house with many rooms. In the well-lit chambers near the entrance, you maintain the persona you present to the world, your professional identity, your social role, the carefully cultivated qualities you want others to perceive. You spend enormous energy decorating these visible rooms, ensuring they reflect the image of who you believe yourself to be or wish to become. Yet your house contains other rooms, chambers you locked long ago and pretend no longer exist. These sealed spaces contain everything you deemed unacceptable about yourself. The rage you were taught to suppress, the desires that contradicted family values, the fears that seemed too shameful to admit, the impulses that violated cultural expectations. You declared these aspects of yourself non-existent, banishing them from the illuminated territories of consciousness into what I have termed the shadow. When you refuse to acknowledge having certain qualities, you declare a part of your personality to be non-existent. Then this denied aspect enters the kingdom of the non-existent, which swells up and takes on enormous proportions. In medical language, each quality in the psyche represents a certain energy, and if you declare an energy to be non-existent, a devil appears instead. Inflation, arrogance, egotism become faces of the devil we all might wear. The side we call the devil dwells in the heart, in the unconscious. Because we have never really come to grips with it, it has remained in its original savage state. We prefer to localize suffering in individual criminals or groups, washing our hands in innocence while ignoring something far more troubling about human nature itself. What I observed in my consulting room soon revealed itself on a far larger scale in society. During the Nazi period, I witnessed an entire nation fall under a spell I recognized from individual psychology, the projection of unacknowledged darkness onto convenient targets. Citizens convinced themselves that evil resided exclusively in Jews, communists, homosexuals, and other designated scapegoats, never suspecting that they were witnessing their own collective shadow externalized. This is where something deeply unsettling about human consciousness reveals itself. The person who obsessively condemns sexual immorality in others often harbors unacknowledged sexual desires that terrify them. The individual who rails against weakness and dependency frequently conceals their own desperate need for support and connection. The citizen who sees enemies everywhere, who identifies certain groups as threats to civilization, often cannot tolerate the chaotic impulses within their own psyche and must locate these impulses in external targets. Watch how this operates in your own life, if you have the courage. Notice which behaviors in others trigger your strongest moral outrage. Observe which qualities you most vehemently deny possessing. Pay attention to the characteristics you find most repulsive in other people. These reactions are not random. They point directly toward your own shadow material, toward aspects of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. It is a frightening thought that humans also have a shadow side consisting of positively demonic energy. The individual seldom knows anything of this. To them, as individuals, it seems incredible that they should ever, in any circumstances, go beyond themselves. Yet let these apparently harmless creatures form a mass, and there emerges a raging monster, each individual becoming only one tiny cell in the monster's body, so that for better or worse, they must accompany it on its bloody rampages and even assist it to the utmost. Modern civilization has constructed elaborate systems that actually amplify this problem. Your education teaches you to identify with certain approved qualities while splitting off everything deemed unacceptable. Your religions often encourage this division by presenting impossible ideals of purity that require suppressing natural human impulses. Your social structures reward those who successfully conceal their darkness while punishing those whose shadow becomes visible. Here is where we encounter a paradox that reveals the true mechanics of how evil multiplies in our world. Good does not become better by being exaggerated. It becomes worse. A small shadow becomes large through being disregarded and repressed. When we attempt to embody only light and goodness while banishing every trace of darkness, we simply drive our rejected aspects deeper into unconsciousness, where they ferment and strengthen. I've observed that people who strive most intensely for perfection, who attempt to become pure vessels of virtue with no trace of shadow, often produce the most extreme manifestations of destruction. The fact is that if one tries beyond their capacity to be perfect, the shadow descends into hell and becomes the devil. Religious fanatics, political idealists, moral crusaders, these individuals so often become perpetrators of the very darkness they claim to oppose. The immunity of any nation depends entirely upon the existence of a leading minority immune to such possession and capable of combating its powerful, suggestive effect. Yet how can anyone become immune to shadow possession when they refuse to acknowledge the shadow exists within themselves? The conflict between conscious values and shadow impulses creates what appears to be an internal war. Yet this warfare itself reveals something profound about the nature of evil in our world. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of their inner opposite, the world must act out the conflict and be torn into opposing halves. Consider this carefully. The wars between nations, the violence between groups, the endless cycles of persecution and revenge. Could these external conflicts actually reflect unresolved shadow dynamics operating within individual psyches, multiplied across populations? We quite forget that we can be as deplorably overcome by virtue as by vice. There exists a sort of frenzied, intense righteousness which is just as destructive and leads to as much injustice and violence as any vice. The person possessed by their own moral superiority, convinced of their absolute righteousness, becomes capable of committing atrocities in the service of their ideals because they have lost all awareness of their own capacity for darkness. This is the mechanism through which the greatest evils enter our world, through those who believe themselves incapable of evil. Now, we arrive at the truth I promised to share. the discovery that emerged from decades of studying both individual psychology and collective behavior. The evil we encounter in our world does not arrive from some external source, from demons lurking in shadows, from cosmic forces of darkness, from supernatural entities that possess innocent humans and corrupt their pure nature. We are the origin of all coming evil. This is neither moral judgment nor philosophical abstraction. It is a psychological fact, observable reality, documented truth that emerges when one honestly examines the architecture of human consciousness. The human psyche should be studied because we are the source of all coming evil. Until this is understood, until we stop searching for evil outside ourselves, we will continue generating the catastrophes that have marked human history. We know nothing of humanity, far too little. The collective shadow manifests outwardly in atrocities, persecution, physical suffering, crime, and the destruction of cultures. It manifests inwardly as self-hatred, depression, feelings of powerlessness, and desire for revenge. What has historically been labeled evil is simply the collective shadow operating through human consciousness, possessing individuals and groups who have never acknowledged their own darkness. This understanding transforms everything about how we approach the problem of evil. Instead of asking how to eliminate evil from the world by identifying and destroying evil people or evil groups, we must ask how to become conscious of the shadow, how to integrate the disowned aspects of ourselves into awareness where they can be examined, understood, and ultimately transformed. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. This act is the essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge, and it requires courage that most people do not possess. Psychology does not know what good and evil are in themselves. It knows them only as judgments about relationships. Yet this integration cannot take place and be put to useful purpose unless one can admit the tendencies bound up with the shadow and allow them some measure of realization, tempered, of course, with necessary awareness. This leads to discomfort and self-confrontation, yet also to genuine self-reliance, without which becoming whole is unthinkable. To confront a person with their shadow is to show them their own light. Once one has experienced what it is like to stand between the opposites, one begins to understand what is meant by the self. Our primary response to the question of evil must be the quest for self-knowledge, for wholeness, which presumes the assimilation of shadow material. The individual must know relentlessly how much good they can do and what crimes they are capable of. This knowledge does not lead to acting on destructive impulses. Quite the opposite. When shadow is made conscious, when we acknowledge our capacity for both good and evil, we gain the possibility of genuine choice rather than being puppets to unconscious forces. In myths, the hero is the one who conquers the dragon, yet both hero and victim must deal with the same dragon. Also, they are no hero who never met the dragon, or who, if once they saw it, declared afterwards that they saw nothing. Only one who has risked the fight with the dragon and is overcome by it wins the treasure. They alone have a genuine claim to self-confidence, for they have faced the dark ground of their self and thereby gained themselves. This metaphor describes the psychological work required to address evil at its source. You must descend into your own underworld, must encounter the monsters dwelling in your psyche's basement, and must acknowledge that these creatures belong to you, rather than projecting them onto convenient scapegoats. This descent is not pleasant. It shatters comfortable illusions about your inherent goodness, forces you to recognize capacities for cruelty and destruction you prefer to believe impossible in yourself. Yet this confrontation with darkness is the only path toward genuine wholeness. There is no light without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. One must strive for wholeness of personality rather than the impossible goal of perfection. Assimilations of the shadow gives a person substance, so to speak. The animal sphere of instinct, as well as the primitive psyche, emerges into consciousness and can no longer be repressed by illusions. When painful material returns from repression, this is itself a gain, for what is inferior or even worthless belongs to me as my shadow and gives me mass. How can I be substantial if I fail to cast a shadow? I must have a dark side also if I am to be whole, and since I become conscious of my shadow, I also remember that I am a human being like any other. It is quite within the bounds of possibility for an individual to recognize the relative evil of their nature. Yet it is a rare and shattering experience to gaze into the face of absolute evil, to see that the capacity for the most extreme destruction exists within human nature itself, within your own being. This recognition, however painful, is the beginning of wisdom. The answer to evil lies within each individual who finds the courage to face their own darkness, to integrate rather than project, to become whole rather than remaining divided. For only the conscious person can cease being an instrument through which unconscious evil enters the world.